Well, magically, somehow everybody in my comment section this week has become an expert on the military power sections of the US Constitution. So I'm sure nobody needs me to repeat this, but just in case you haven't picked up a Constitution since middle school or maybe ever, I think it's time we run through what the actual powers are of the executive branch and the legislative branch when it comes to using the military. We're just asking what powers the Articles of the Constitution give to each branch of the federal government to deploy and control the federal military when it comes to dealing with things overseas in particular. I'm going to start with the executive because that's usually who we think of when we think of kind of the power to use the military, right? And there are basically three things you have to think about when it comes to the power of the president over the military. First, Article 2, Section 2, he is the commander-in-chief. That's kind of the big one, right? Second, in the same section, he has the power to make treaties, although only with the advice and consent of the Senate. But the ability to make treaties kind of means he can settle any kind of military stuff, right? So that's a big important part. And the third, which doesn't sound like it's part of this, but it's really important, is that he must faithfully execute the laws. And the reason that's important is that Congress writes the laws, and he, as the executive, has to execute the laws faithfully. In other words, his job, his whole job, is sort of to do what Congress says, to act out Congress's decisions. And this is not some crazy out there theory. Remember that the Constitution was our second Constitution. The first one only had a Congress. It didn't have a president. And so the decision to add a president was not one that was universally agreed upon. I mean, I think it was a good idea, but not 100% of people were on board with this new system. So ensuring that Congress remained the more important branch and that the president only acted out their orders was not an accident. Now let's jump back to what a commander-in-chief is, because what the heck is that, right? Well, think for a second about pretty much any war movie set in that time period or pretty much anywhere around that time period, and think about what a general or somebody in charge of an army would be doing. Can you imagine it? Can you see that big map on the table where they're moving their little fake armies around and deciding how they're going to attack and where? Yeah, that's what a commander-in-chief is thought to do in that time period. They're kind of arranging troop movements, deciding the kind of strategy that they're going to use on the field. Today, the commander-in-chief is still going to be doing strategy. It's still the person deciding what the military is going to do within the campaign. Not everybody totally agrees whether or not this restricts the power of the president or not. But one thing is definitely sure. In 1778, commander-in-chief did not mean a person who could unilaterally send an army halfway across the world in a matter of hours. The idea that if somebody was going to be sending an army to another part of the world, they would have plenty of time to talk to Congress first would have been very much assumed at that time period. So let's flip over to Congress for a minute. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress a bunch of powers related to the military, including to raise and support armies, although only for 2 years at a time. And the reason for this is that basically they wanted to give Congress the ability to decide we don't need an army anymore every 2 years. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Congress has a constitutional power to get rid of the entire army. That is pretty important and pretty telling, I think. If they have the power to get rid of the army, they probably have a lot of power over what we do with it, right? Now we get to the two big ones, I think. The first is that Congress makes the rules to govern and regulate the land and naval forces. Now stop and think through this for a second, because this is really important. If the president commands, as commander-in-chief, the forces, and Congress writes the rules that govern them, I want you to come up with a logical explanation for where the line is between each of their power. If one makes the rules and one commands them, where do you think the line is? And feel free to drop that in the comments. But I think what's even more important is that they not only make the rules, but because they're the ones appropriating the money, they raise and support the armies. This is really a key control mechanism over the military. So once again, the president commands on the one hand, but Congress writes their rules and decides how much money they get. And to be clear, Congress has cut off funding to the military before it threatened to if the president doesn't stop certain actions. So they very much have the power to do that. Now, of course, Congress also is the only one with the power to declare war, but what exactly declaring war means is a little bit fuzzy, and whether we have to declare war before we can start having one. Also, a pretty good question. in the original dichotomy, it kind of made sense that maybe Congress declared it and then the president orchestrated it, and that was the difference between being a commander-in-chief and being the declarer-in-chief, so to speak. But still not totally sure exactly what that means, but it's certainly one more piece of power that's been kind of heaped on Congress and weighs against the president having any kind of unilateral power to make decisions on his own. Now, Congress is allowed to delegate some of this authority. Sorry, by the way, it's really hot. In some ways, they have done so. So the War Powers Resolution, which a lot of people are talking about right now, which was issued in 1973, does allow the president to make certain unilateral military decisions because Congress has pre-authorized him to do so. But the War Powers Resolution only allows the president to act unilaterally in 3 situations. First, Congress has given him some sort of specific authorization, some sort of a declaration. Second, there is a statutory authority that allows for it. Or third, there is some sort of an emergency where America's property, or American people have specifically been attacked. There is a later part of the War Powers Resolution that allows the president to attack unilaterally and notify Congress within 48 hours, but that is only if one of those 3 situations has already been met. So that's a quick breakdown of the military powers and how they are delegated between the executive and legislative branch, and also how they've been further delegated through the War Powers Resolution. I'm sure we're going to be talking about the facts of what's going on the ground in Iran over the next few days and applying them to these legal standards, figure out how they apply or how they don't apply. But stop, comment, tell me your thoughts. What do you think? And by the way, there's a copy of the War Powers Resolution in my Linktree in my shared documents folder. It is in the National Guard folder, so you can go take a look at that. I also put a copy of the authorized use of military force from 9/11 in there in case you want to look at that. A lot of people are citing that these days as well, so you can look at those original sources and compare them. The part of the War Powers Resolution you're going to want to probably focus on the most is Section 1541C. That is where they break down those 3 specific situations where the War Powers Resolution is allowed to be used. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Let me know if you have any other questions, and those of you who have been supporting me, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're keeping me going. The piles of paper keep getting bigger, so if anybody feels like sending me more paper, that would be cool. There's a lot of stuff in my Amazon wish list. If anybody wants to send it over, thank you, or there's Venmo, whatever you want to do. Thanks a lot, guys.